Good evening, my dear friend. Tonight I invite you to take a gentle stroll with me through the streets of 1800s New York, a city teeming with life, yet home to many who faced hardships each day. As the city grew rapidly, so too did the gaps between wealth and poverty. In the shadows of the towering buildings there existed a world of struggle where food was scarce and survival was a constant challenge. But amidst these challenges the people found ways to get by, to nourish themselves and to carry on. Imagine walking through the bustling streets with the sound of horse-drawn carts and the chatter of busy markets. But as the noise fades into the background, you hear the quiet murmurs of the less fortunate, the unsung heroes of the city, the poor. What did they eat? How did they survive? And, perhaps most importantly, what did food mean to them? Let's take a slow walk through the world of their everyday meals. Picture yourself standing on the edge of a busy street in New York during the 1800s. The city is growing, but as it expands, so too does its inequality. Tall buildings, expensive shops, and fine restaurants might catch your eye, but if you look closely, you'll see the rough edges of society, the poor. The poor in this city lived in cramped apartments, sometimes sharing a single room with multiple families. In these conditions, food wasn't something to be enjoyed or savored. It was simply a means of survival. It was never a luxury, often hard to come by, and always a source of anxiety. Now imagine waking up in a tenement building on a cold winter morning. There is no stove to cook a warm meal. Instead, the promise of food often relied on the smallest scraps or the most basic ingredients, just enough to keep going. But how did they manage with so little? And what did they actually eat? In the poorest parts of New York, food was a basic necessity. Many families depended on cheap, low-quality food that could be found in the city's markets or local shops. For a few cents, they could buy bread, potatoes, and sometimes meat, though that was a rare treat. Let's pause for a moment and reflect. Picture yourself in the dimly lit, crowded tenement room where every meal is a struggle to put together. The aroma of stale bread might fill the air, and the thought of a warm bowl of soup seems like a distant dream. It's not luxury or indulgent. It's survival. The poorest families often ate the same thing day after day. Bread, potatoes, perhaps some beans, and occasionally salted or pickled meat. They were simple meals, but they were enough to keep them going. Food wasn't something to be excited about. It was just fuel for the body. Many families would gather around a single table, perhaps with their children by their side, all waiting for whatever little food there was to be shared. A family meal wasn't a celebration, but a quiet, shared effort to make sure everyone ate, even if it wasn't much. But in these moments, even the smallest meal brought some comfort, a shared sense of unity and survival. And so with each passing day, food became more than just something to eat. It became a symbol of resilience, of managing with what little they had. It was part of a larger story, a quiet struggle that many people lived through without ever being truly seen. Imagine yourself walking through the narrow streets, past the bustling bakeries. You can smell the fresh bread from a distance, but for the poor, bread wasn't just a food, it was a lifeline. Bread was the most common food item. It could be eaten with almost anything. Sometimes it was paired with butter or jam, but other times it was simply eaten alone. Bread was cheap, filling, and easy to store. It became the cornerstone of many meals, sustaining people through their long, hard days. For the poor, a loaf of bread might be their entire dinner. If they had butter or jam to spread on it, they considered themselves lucky. A single loaf of bread could go a long way feeding a family for a day or two. As you picture yourself in one of these homes, the bread might be torn into pieces, shared between the family members, each bite a simple act of survival. There were no fancy sandwiches or elaborate meals here. Just bread, sometimes stale, often dry, but always filling. In times of greater hardship, the poor would often stretch their bread further, using it to soak up soups or broths, absorbing whatever nutrients were left in the watery remains of a meal. Bread wasn't just food, it was a constant, a presence at every meal, offering a sense of security in a world where very little else was certain. And so, as you sit down to a modest meal, you realize how much this simple food symbolized. Bread wasn't just sustenance, it was comfort, the one reliable thing in a life full of uncertainty. The aroma of fresh-baked bread would be a rare luxury, but even when it was stale, it still brought a sense of stability, a reminder that for another day, you had enough. As we continue our walk through the streets of 1800s New York, let's turn our attention to another humble food, the potato. Imagine a small, weathered cart selling these root vegetables. Potatoes, though simple, were one of the few affordable foods that the poor could rely on. They were cheap, nutritious, and versatile, making them a central part of many meals. Now picture the potatoes being boiled in a large pot, their earthy aroma filling the air. For many families, a pot of boiled potatoes might be the most they had for dinner that night. Often, there was no butter or seasoning to add, just plain, starchy potatoes. But as basic as it was, it offered something important: satiety. A meal of potatoes could help fill the stomach, providing energy for the long, tiring days ahead. Let's pause and reflect on this. Imagine yourself sitting down with your family, sharing a pot of potatoes. No meat, no fancy side dishes, just potatoes boiled until soft, with maybe a sprinkle of salt if there was any. You can hear the quiet sounds of chewing, the silence broken only by the soft murmur of conversation. It's not a feast, but it's enough. Alongside potatoes, beans were another essential food. Beans were inexpensive and packed with protein, making them an important addition to the diet of the poor. They could be cooked in a variety of ways, boiled, stewed, or added to soups, and were often mixed with potatoes or whatever other scraps could be found. As you sit down to a meal of beans and potatoes, you realize that these two foods, though simple and repetitive, are the foundation of survival for many in New York's poorer neighborhoods. In a world where every day was a struggle, potatoes and beans were a constant. They were reliable. They were enough. And as the evening sun fades and the meal is finished, you know that for now, at least, you are full, and you will make it through another day. Now let's move to something a little different: meat. For most poor families in 1800s New York, meat was a rare luxury. It wasn't a regular part of their diet. Meat was something they would dream of, something that could only be enjoyed when they could afford it. Even then, it was often the cheapest cuts or preserved meat, such as salted or pickled varieties, which were more affordable than fresh meat. Imagine yourself standing in a small, crowded butcher's shop where the air smells of raw meat. The cuts of beef, pork, or mutton on display might seem like a feast to someone used to bread and potatoes. But these cuts were often tough, requiring long hours of slow cooking or boiling to soften. For many, the thought of a hearty stew with chunks of meat was a dream, a rare treat. Sometimes families would boil bones to make a meager broth, adding whatever scraps of meat could be salvaged from them. These broths, though thin and watery, would be ladled over bread or potatoes, turning them into something more substantial, something special. The poor didn't often get to enjoy a full portion of meat, but if they could manage it, even a small piece was savoured. Imagine the joy of sitting down to a dinner that includes a small chunk of meat, perhaps a little piece of salted pork, or a tough piece of beef slowly simmered into tenderness. It wasn't much, but it was a rare luxury, a small moment of indulgence. In an otherwise difficult life, for those who could afford it, meat represented a taste of something better, a sign of prosperity, even if it was only for a day. But for the poor, the thought of meat was often just that, a thought, a hope that one day they could have a full meal with meat as a central part of it. As we continue our journey, imagine yourself walking through a busy street lined with tenement buildings. The sun is setting and there's a chill in the air. The sounds of New York are starting to quiet down, but there is one place that never truly stops: the soup kitchens. In the early days of New York, soup kitchens and charitable institutions became a vital lifeline for the city's poor. These were places where the hungry could find a warm meal, even if they didn't have the means to pay for it. Imagine walking into one of these soup kitchens, where the smell of simmering broth fills the air. A large pot filled with a simple soup made from the few ingredients available is being ladled into bowls, one after the other. For many, soup kitchens were the only source of food, a place where they could get a meal when there was nothing else. These meals weren't luxurious, they were simple, often made from leftover vegetables, bread, and scraps. Yet for those who lined up outside these kitchens, it was more than just food, it was hope, it was survival. Many of these soup kitchens were run by charitable organizations, often religious groups or local communities who were dedicated to feeding the poor. They didn't just serve food, they served a sense of dignity, a recognition that even the most vulnerable deserved to eat, to be nourished. The meals may not have been much, but they were served with care. The kindness of strangers, even if it was just for a moment, gave the poor a sense of humanity in a city that could sometimes feel cold and indifferent. Let's pause here and reflect. Picture the scene of someone standing in line at a soup kitchen, feeling a mix of anticipation and gratitude. As the bowl of soup is placed in their hands, it isn't just the warmth of the food that comforts them, but the knowledge that someone, somewhere, cared enough to provide this small but meaningful gift. It's a moment of connection, a reminder that in the hardest of times, there is still kindness. For many, the soup kitchen was the difference between going to bed hungry or having the strength to face another day. It was a quiet reminder that even when the world feels too big and too harsh, there is always a place for compassion. And for the people of 1800s New York, these kitchens offered a little light in the darkness, a brief moment of relief from the struggles they faced. As we walk through the winding streets of New York, let's take a moment to imagine the bustling, street vendors offering their wares. The sounds of the city continue in the background, the clatter of horse-drawn carts, the chatter of pedestrians. But in these moments, your attention is drawn to the small, temporary stalls lining the streets. These vendors, offering a range of simple foods, provided a rare moment of comfort to those who could afford even the smallest indulgence. For the poor, street food represented a chance to experience something beyond the routine of bread and potatoes. It was an opportunity to enjoy a quick, filling meal on the go. Imagine walking up to a cart where hot, freshly made food is being served. The vendors might be selling everything from pies to hot dogs to simple pastries, foods that could be eaten quickly and cheaply, offering a brief respite from the otherwise monotonous meals at home. In those moments, street food wasn't just about hunger. It was about breaking free, even for a short while, from the rigid routine of survival. A warm pie or a savory sandwich could bring a small but meaningful moment of joy. It was a fleeting luxury, something that allowed the weary and overworked to take a break, to experience a tiny bit of pleasure in a day otherwise filled with struggle. Think about the joy of eating something different, something with a little more flavor or variety. The smell of a sizzling hot dog, the crunch of a freshly baked pastry. These were little luxuries that could make the day feel just a little bit brighter. While these moments were rare, they meant a lot to the people who relied on them to get through their long, hard days. Even for the poor, these small moments of indulgence were important. They gave them something to look forward to. They allowed for a brief escape from the realities of daily life and provided a sense of comfort in a world where comfort was often hard to come by. As the sun begins to set and the vendors pack up their carts, we're reminded that in the simplest of meals, there's a comfort, a small spark of happiness that can make the world feel a little less heavy. Let's slow down for a moment and think about the families and communities that gathered around these simple meals. In the tenements of New York, where food was often scarce, the act of sharing a meal became something far more meaningful than just a way to fill the stomach. It was about survival, yes, but it was also about connection. Family and community played a central role in how the poor navigated their daily lives and, importantly, how they made do with what they had. Imagine a small, dimly lit room where several families live under one roof. The air is thick with the warmth of bodies gathered close, sharing not just food, but stories, laughter, and the simple comfort of being together. In these crowded spaces, mealtime was sacred. Even though the meal itself might not be much, the act of sitting together, of sharing whatever little food there was, formed the glue that held families and communities together. As the evening sets in, you can hear the soft murmur of voices, the scraping of chairs, the clatter of pots and utensils. It's not a feast, but the room is filled with warmth, both from the food and the people. Imagine a mother carefully dividing a loaf of bread among her children, making sure each person gets their share, even though it isn't much. The children might squabble, but the act of eating together brings them closer, even for just a moment. Let's take a moment to reflect. This isn't just about food, it's about love, sacrifice, and the deep bonds that were formed around the shared struggle of daily life. In these moments, food became more than sustenance. It became a symbol of resilience, of togetherness, of shared survival. The family meal, no matter how humble, was an act of hope. It was a reminder that even in the hardest of times, you had your family, you had your community. And for those who didn't have family close by, the neighborhood itself became a form of family. Neighbors helped each other, sharing food, offering a helping hand, and making sure no one went to bed hungry. Even in the hardest of times, the sense of community provided comfort, a safety net that made the struggles of daily life just a little bit easier to bear. In New York's poorest neighborhoods, family and community weren't just important, they were essential. They were the reason people kept going, even when everything else seemed impossible. As the 1800s unfolded, New York was transforming. The city, once small and relatively quiet, was now a bustling metropolis, teeming with people from all over the world. Immigrants poured in from Ireland, Germany, Italy, and beyond, bringing with them not only their culture, their languages, but also their food traditions. These new waves of immigrants had a profound impact on the city's food scene, and even the poor began to experience new flavors, new meals, and new ways of cooking. Imagine walking through the streets of the Lower East Side, where many of the new immigrants settled. The air is filled with the smell of unfamiliar spices and cooking methods. On one street corner, you might hear the sizzling of sausages being grilled, a reminder of the German immigrants who brought their beloved sausages to the city. On another, the aroma of fresh pasta or pizza dough rising from an Italian bakery fills the air, a symbol of the thousands of Italians who had come to seek a better life. For the poor, these new foods provided something new, something different. They didn't have the means to indulge in the finer restaurants or expensive dishes, but they could find comfort in the street vendors who sold these new, exciting foods. Immigrant communities began to set up small markets and food stands, selling ingredients and dishes that the poor could afford. Even in the hardest of times, food became a way of connecting to a wider world, a way of experiencing something beyond the struggles of daily survival. Imagine standing in front of an Italian vendor's stall, the smell of garlic and tomatoes wafting in the air. You might not have the money for a full meal, but a small bowl of pasta or a piece of bread with olive oil could be an affordable luxury, a taste of something far away, something different. For the poor, it wasn't just about the food itself, it was about the experience, the opportunity to try something new, something that added a little flavor to their lives. New food influences didn't just change what people ate, they changed how they thought about food. They introduced new tastes, new ideas, and new ways of preparing meals. For the poor, these changes were a form of cultural exchange, an opportunity to experience the broader world even within the confines of their small, cramped kitchens. And in a city that was constantly evolving, these foods became part of the rich tapestry of New York's food culture. As we continue through the streets of 1800s New York, let's pause for a moment and think about how religion and ritual shaped the food experiences of the poor. New York was, and still is, a melting pot of different cultures and faiths. The Jewish, Irish, Italian, and many other communities brought their religious practices with them, and those practices often influenced what, when, and how they ate. For many, food was not just a physical necessity, it was deeply tied to faith, to tradition, and to ritual. Imagine yourself in a small, immigrant-run neighborhood where a Jewish family is preparing for the Sabbath. As the sun sets on Friday evening, the table is set with bread, wine, and a few simple dishes, all prepared in honor of the holy day. For the poor, these meals were often modest, sometimes just a small loaf of challah and a few pickled vegetables, but they were imbued with meaning. They were a way of marking time, of connecting to something greater than the hardships of daily life. For the Irish immigrants, the tradition of a Sunday roast or a communal meal after Mass became an important ritual. Even though the food might be simple, potatoes, bread, and perhaps a bit of salted beef, it was more than just a meal. It was a time to gather with family, to give thanks and to rest. In these moments, food took on a deeper significance. It became a way to honor tradition, to feel a sense of connection to a larger community, even if that community was far away, across an ocean. Let's take a step back and reflect. Think about the ritual of sharing a meal with others. It's not just about the food, it's about the act of coming together, of creating a sense of belonging, of comfort. For the poor in New York, these religious meals were a small respite, a reminder that despite their struggles, they were part of something much bigger. The food wasn't extravagant, but it was sacred. It was food prepared with love, with care, and with the belief that no matter how hard life became, there was always room for faith, for family, and for tradition. As we continue our journey through the streets of 1800s New York, it's important to remember that even in times of hardship, the poor still found moments of joy, and often food played a central role in these moments of leisure, of entertainment. While their lives were filled with long hours of work and struggle, the simple pleasures of sharing a meal with friends or attending a community gathering offered them a much-needed escape from the daily grind. Picture this. The sun is setting, and a small group of people has gathered in the corner of a neighborhood park. The streetlights cast a warm glow on their faces as they sit down on benches, sharing a meal. It might be a simple loaf of bread, a piece of cheese, or a small pot of stew. But in this moment, the food isn't just about eating. It's about coming together. It's about sharing stories, laughter, and experiences. These moments of community were a form of entertainment, a time to relax and forget, even briefly, about the challenges of life. In these quiet gatherings, food provided not only sustenance, but also a sense of joy and camaraderie. It allowed the people to feel connected to one another, to build relationships, and to escape from the demands of work and poverty. Food became the center of social life, even for those who had little else. It wasn't about lavish meals or extravagant dinners. It was about the simple act of sharing what little they had and finding comfort in each other's company. Imagine the sense of warmth and connection that comes with these gatherings. For the poor, entertainment might not have come in the form of lavish balls or expensive theater shows, but it came in these simple, intimate moments. These small gatherings where people shared food and stories became a vital part of their social life, a way to build bonds, to feel a sense of belonging, and to find joy in the midst of hardship. Let's take a moment to reflect. How often do we take for granted the joy of sharing a meal with others? For the poor in 1800s New York, these moments were precious. They weren't just meals, they were expressions of community, of shared humanity, and of hope. Even when times were tough, the act of coming together over food offered them a respite, a small but meaningful break from the difficulties of daily life. As we wander further through the streets of 1800s New York, It becomes clear that the rapid urbanization of the city deeply affected the accessibility and availability of food. The city was growing at an unprecedented rate, new buildings were springing up, and the population was exploding, with immigrants coming from all corners of the world. While the rich saw the growth of lavish restaurants and the development of an elaborate food market, the poor found themselves increasingly squeezed out of access to fresh, affordable food. Imagine walking through a crowded market where the air is thick with the sounds of haggling and the smell of fresh produce. In some parts of the city, the wealthy could easily afford to shop for high-quality food in these bustling markets. But for the poor, the situation was very different. As the city expanded, so did the divide between the rich and the poor, especially when it came to food. The poor lived in tenements, often on the outskirts of the city, far away from the markets, that held fresh vegetables, meats, and fruits. For them, food was not something they could simply walk down the street to buy. It had to be cheap, and often that meant it was low in quality. The city's food system, like much of the city itself, catered to those who could afford it, leaving the poor with the scraps. Now let's pause and reflect. Picture yourself walking from your tenement to the local market. You're carrying a few pennies in your pocket, barely enough for a loaf of bread, maybe some potatoes. You pass by the stalls filled with fresh fruits and vegetables, but you know you can't afford them. So you continue on, knowing that your meal will consist of whatever you can scrape together from what's available. The price of fresh food was often beyond reach for the poor, and they were forced to rely on cheaper, less nutritious options. And then there was the issue of food preservation. With little access to refrigeration, many poor families had to rely on preserved food like salted meats, pickles, or dried goods. This meant that fresh meals were a rarity. The food they ate might have been sitting in a jar for weeks or months, making it less nutritious and less satisfying. Urbanization had created a city where food access was deeply unequal. The wealthier New Yorkers could enjoy the luxury of fresh produce, meat, and fine dining, while the poor had to make do with whatever they could afford, often sacrificing nutrition and variety. In this way, food became another way in which the divide between rich and poor was made painfully clear. As we reflect on the daily struggles of the poor in 1800s New York, we can't help but notice how food wasn't just about pleasure or even nourishment. It was, quite often, a matter of survival. For those living in the poorest neighborhoods, the food they consumed was not always enough to keep them healthy, and in many cases it led to illness. The lack of proper nutrition, combined with poor living conditions and overcrowding, created a perfect storm for diseases to spread quickly. Imagine walking through the crowded streets, noticing the children playing barefoot in the dirt, the small, cramped apartments with little ventilation, and the smell of unwashed bodies mingling with the scent of stale bread. In these conditions, the poor faced constant health risks. Malnutrition was widespread, as the diet of bread, potatoes, and occasionally beans or meat did not provide the essential vitamins and minerals the body needed to stay healthy. The impact of this diet on the body was profound. Imagine a mother trying to care for her children, giving them what little food she has. The meal might fill their stomachs, but it isn't enough to keep them strong and healthy. Over time, the lack of fresh fruits and vegetables, the lack of proteins and vitamins would take a toll. Rickets, scurvy, and other diseases related to poor nutrition were common among the poor, especially children. Let's take a moment to reflect on how food affects our bodies. We often take for granted the fact that we can nourish ourselves with a wide variety of foods. For the poor of 1800s New York, food was not just a source of energy, it was something that could make the difference between life and death. With so little to work with, their bodies became weakened by a lack of proper nutrients, which left them vulnerable to the diseases that were rampant in the crowded slums. Even though people tried their best to stretch their food, often turning to soups, stews, and anything that could fill their bellies, their diets were far from balanced. It was hard to stay healthy when the only food available was preserved, pickled, or starchy. Fresh fruit, green vegetables, and lean meats were simply too expensive or out of reach. In the face of these struggles, the poor depended on their resilience and the hope that their next meal would be better, that tomorrow might bring something more nourishing. But for many, that hope remained a distant dream, and their health continued to deteriorate as a result of inadequate food. As we move through the year in 1800s New York, it's important to reflect on how the changing seasons affected the food available to the poor. For many, the arrival of winter or the heat of summer brought both physical and emotional challenges, as food became harder to obtain or preserve. Seasons didn't just dictate what grew in the fields, they also determined what was accessible in the city, and for the poor, this meant some months were harder than others. Imagine the cold grip of winter settling over New York. The streets are blanketed in snow, the wind is sharp and biting, and the food available is slim. Fresh produce is almost impossible to find, and what little does arrive in the city is priced so high that only the wealthier can afford it. For the poor, winter meant that the staples of their diet, potatoes, bread, and preserved meats, would be the mainstay for months. There was no fresh salad to brighten the day, no fruit to provide a burst of vitamin C. Instead, the cold months were filled with the monotonous taste of root vegetables and salted meats which, while filling, lacked the nutrients that were so crucial to staying healthy. Winter also meant the scarcity of food. The poor relied on preserved goods, salted pork, dried beans, pickled vegetables, and hard bread. These foods could withstand the cold and would be stored for months, but they didn't provide the freshness or the variety that was needed for a balanced diet. In the absence of fresh foods, families had to make do with whatever they could store, and this often meant eating the same meals day in and day out. The cold, combined with the lack of fresh produce, took a toll on health and well-being. With little to break the monotony of their meals, the poor could only hope for the warmth of spring to bring relief. Now let's imagine the shift as spring finally arrives. The snow melts, the air softens, and with it, a glimmer of hope. Fresh vegetables, fruits, and greens begin to make their way into the markets. For a brief moment, the poor might be able to taste something fresh, something full of nutrients, perhaps a few tomatoes, a small bundle of greens, or even a handful of fresh berries. But these luxuries were still out of reach for most. Even in spring, the cost of fresh food was prohibitive, and the poorest could still only dream of a fully balanced, varied diet. Reflect on this. Seasons shape not only our environment, but also our food. For the poor of 1800s New York, the seasons dictated not just what they ate, but how they ate, how much they ate, and how healthy they could be. The struggle to eat well in a city where food was scarce and expensive was ever present, and as the seasons changed, so too did their hopes for a better meal. As we continue our exploration of 1800s New York, we come to another essential element that shaped the food experiences of the poor: work. For the poor, their access to food was often directly linked to their ability to earn a living, and that meant long, exhausting hours of labor. In New York, where the wealth gap was stark, the poor had few opportunities to make enough money to feed themselves and their families properly. Many worked multiple jobs, and even then, their wages were so low that food was a constant struggle. Picture yourself waking up early in the morning, long before the sun rises, to head out to work. Perhaps you're a factory worker, laboring long hours in the city's growing industrial sector. Or maybe you're a domestic servant, cleaning the homes of the wealthy. Either way, the work is grueling, and at the end of the day, the wages you earn are just enough to buy the bare minimum to survive. Food isn't something you can splurge on, it's something you fight for. As the day wears on, you work through exhaustion, knowing that what you bring home is unlikely to be much. If you're fortunate, maybe you can buy a loaf of bread or some potatoes at the market, but often even that is a luxury. The work is tiring, and it takes a toll not only on your body but on your ability to properly care for your family. If you're fortunate enough to have a job that offers some paid time off, there might be a chance to rest. But for many, the cycle of work and hunger never stopped. And the longer you work, the more food becomes just another commodity, something that is earned, and earned very little. The fact that food was tied so closely to work meant that the poor were caught in a cycle: work long hours for low pay, buy only what's cheapest and simplest to cook, and try to make do with whatever little is left at the end of the day. In such a demanding world, the poor found themselves unable to break free from this struggle. Think about this for a moment. When food is tied to labor, there's little room for joy or indulgence. It's just about making it through the day, filling the stomach enough to keep going. If you're fortunate, there might be some variety, a bit of meat in a soup, a fresh loaf of bread on occasion. But for most, it's the same cycle. And as time goes on, this cycle doesn't ease up. It becomes a way of life, defined by this constant push to get by, just enough to make it to the next day. As we think about the role of work in food availability, it becomes clear that the poor were not just working for survival, they were working for food itself. The labor was exhausting, and the food that came from it was minimal, leaving them just enough to scrape by. Food, like work, was a means to an end, but never a source of comfort or luxury. As we walk through the city's streets, we come to the bustling local markets and small shops that were the lifelines of the poor in 1800s New York. The markets were more than just places to buy food. They were the heart of the community, a place where people came together, exchanged goods, and, for a brief moment, shared in the small pleasures of life. For the poor, these markets were where they found the food that would sustain them through their daily struggles, but they were also a place of connection, of commerce, and of survival. Picture yourself walking through one of these markets. The air is filled with the sounds of street vendors calling out their wares, perhaps the clatter of a stall being set up, the shouting of prices, or the haggling between buyers and sellers. The poor, with their limited budgets, could only shop for what they could afford, often buying just the essentials: bread, potatoes, maybe a few vegetables, or the cheapest cuts of meat. In these markets there was no room for luxury. The food on display was basic, simple, and often of questionable quality. But for the poor, it was all they could afford. A small bundle of wilted greens might be the only fresh produce they could get, or a bag of dried beans might be the only source of protein for the family. Still, the market provided them with just enough to survive another day. These local shops and markets were also where the poor interacted with one another. The exchange of food wasn't just a transaction, it was a chance to share a few words, to check in with neighbors, to gossip about the day's events, and to momentarily forget the struggles of daily life. Even though the food was basic and the prices were high for most, the sense of community these markets provided made them an essential part of the city's fabric. Let's pause and reflect. Imagine the excitement of walking to the local market, even if it meant a long walk through the city. The thought of buying just enough to feed your family was a small victory. And when you found a vendor who would throw in an extra potato or a few pieces of stale bread for a lower price, it felt like a moment of kindness, a reminder that even in the hardest of times, there were small moments of generosity that made survival just a little bit easier. In these markets, food became more than just something to eat. It was a symbol of endurance, of perseverance. The vendors knew the hardship their customers faced, and sometimes they would offer small discounts or barter, allowing the poor to stretch their money just a little further. It wasn't about making a profit, it was about survival for both the vendor and the buyer. As we reach the end of our journey through 1800s New York, let's reflect on the deeper significance that food held for the poor, especially when times were tough. Despite the hardships, the scarcity, and the overwhelming challenges they faced, food was more than just a way to fill the stomach. It was a symbol of resilience, hope, and the strength of the human spirit. Imagine a family at the end of a long, exhausting day. The father comes home after working countless hours, and the mother has spent her own long day managing the household and preparing whatever food she could afford. They sit down together, perhaps around a small, worn-out table, and begin to eat. The meal might not be much, a few slices of bread, some boiled potatoes, maybe a small piece of salted meat, but it's enough to keep them going, enough to face another day. In that moment, food represents something far deeper than nourishment. It's the act of survival, yes, but it's also an act of love, of togetherness. It's the comfort of knowing that no matter how difficult life becomes, there will always be this small moment of peace, this small opportunity to share what little they have with one another. The meal, as modest as it may be, is the thread that keeps them connected. It's a sign that even in the darkest of times, they have each other. Let's pause for a moment to think about the resilience behind these meals. For the poor of New York, food wasn't a luxury, it was a means of survival. But it also became a quiet statement of strength. It was a reminder that no matter the circumstances, they could still find ways to make it through, to keep going. Each day was a struggle, but each meal was a victory, a reaffirmation that they were still here, still fighting, still surviving. Food became a symbol of hope. Every piece of bread, every potato, every scrap of meat was a small victory against the odds. Even when the world seemed overwhelming, the simple act of sharing a meal together brought a moment of comfort, of normalcy, and of connection. The poor in New York may not have had much, but they had this: the ability to come together and nourish each other, even in the face of hardship. And as we reflect on these quiet moments of resilience, we are reminded that food is more than just sustenance. It's a symbol of the human capacity to endure, to adapt, and to survive, no matter the challenges. The poor of 1800s New York were not defined by their lack of wealth or their hardships. They were defined by their ability to persevere, to find hope in the most basic of meals, and to keep moving forward one meal at a time. As we reach the final part of our journey through the food experiences of 1800s New York, let's take a moment to reflect on the legacy of the poor and how their struggle with food is still remembered today. The simple meals they ate, the resourcefulness they showed, and the communities they built around food have all shaped the culinary culture of New York and beyond. Though the times were difficult, the ingenuity and resilience of those who lived through it left an indelible mark on history. Imagine walking through the streets of New York today, past the sleek, modern buildings and the high-end restaurants. The city has changed, grown in size, wealth, and diversity. But if you look carefully, you can still find traces of the food. Traditions that began in the 1800s when the poor made do with what they had and shared what little they could. The community markets, the immigrant food stands, and the sense of togetherness that food inspired, these are legacies that have endured. In today's New York, we see the influence of those early immigrant foods in the vibrant culinary scene that now spans the entire globe. The pizzas, sausages, and pasta dishes of Italian immigrants, the hearty stews and breads brought over by the Irish, and the countless other flavors that came from waves of immigration. These dishes were once humble, simple meals for the poor. Today, they are celebrated in high-end restaurants and casual eateries alike, a testament to the perseverance and creativity of those who first brought these foods to the city. But beyond the dishes themselves, the spirit of community and resilience that the poor of New York embodied lives on. The sense of coming together over a shared meal, the effort to nourish and care for one another, is a value that persists in our modern food culture. As we gather around tables with our families and friends, sharing meals of all kinds, we are continuing the tradition of those who came before us. We may have more than they did, but we are still bound by the same basic need to nourish not just our bodies, but our relationships, our communities, and ourselves. So as the story of food in 1800s New York comes to a close, let's remember that the struggles of the poor were not in vain. The meals they shared, though modest and simple, were filled with love, resilience, and an unwavering spirit of survival. Their legacy lives on in the food we eat today, in the way we gather around our tables, and in the way we share what we have with those we care about. And as we say goodnight, let's remember that food, in its simplest form, is more than just sustenance. It is a reflection of who we are, where we come from, and the strength it takes to keep going, no matter the odds. As we bring our journey to a close, let's pause for a moment to reflect on the profound strength the poor in 1800s New York exhibited. Through their relationship with food, food was not just a source of sustenance for them, it was a reflection of their resilience and their ability to endure hardship, to push through every day despite the odds stacked against them. For them, food was a symbol of survival, a small yet vital victory in a world that often seemed indifferent to their struggles. Imagine the faces of the people who lived in these crowded, grimy tenements. They weren't just people scraping by. They were fighters, survivors. Each meal they prepared and shared was an act of strength, an act of defiance against the harsh realities they faced. It wasn't easy to go without fresh food, to make do with the same basic meals day after day, to scrape together whatever ingredients they could afford. But they did it. They found a way, no matter what. This resilience is something that is often overlooked, something that gets lost in the grand narrative of history. But the quiet strength of the poor, those who struggled to feed their families, who found ways to stretch a loaf of bread for a few more meals, who shared the little they had with neighbors, this is the true story. It's a story of people who refused to be defeated by circumstance, who made life work in the only way they could. Let's reflect on the families, the mothers, the fathers, the children, who lived day by day, meal by meal, always looking forward to the next bite of bread, the next bowl of soup. These moments of survival, though small, were victories in their own right. For the poor, food wasn't just nourishment, it was a form of hope, a reminder that they could carry on, no matter how difficult the world around them became. And perhaps, as we sit down to our own meals tonight, we can take a moment to appreciate the quiet strength that food represents in our own lives. Just as the poor in 1800s New York persevered, so too do we, through our own struggles, through our own daily challenges. Food continues to be a source of connection, of comfort, and of resilience. It's a simple, everyday act that binds us to the past, to the people who came before us, and to the struggles they faced with quiet dignity. As we approach the end of our journey, let's reflect on how the struggles of the poor in 1800s New York have left an enduring legacy. Their resourcefulness, their ability to stretch simple ingredients into meals, and their sense of community and togetherness have all contributed to the food culture we know today. The hardship they faced in feeding their families was not in vain. It shaped not only their lives, but the lives of future generations as well. Imagine the generations that followed, those who were raised in the aftermath of these struggles. Though the circumstances had improved somewhat by the turn of the century, the spirit of resilience and resourcefulness remained. The next generations, growing up in a city that was slowly beginning to prosper, were still influenced by the simple meals of their ancestors. They too learned the importance of family meals, of finding strength in food, and of making do with what was available. Let's take a moment to reflect on this. Think about the way food, even in times of struggle, creates a sense of tradition, of continuity. Families who were once poor, living in cramped tenements, passed down recipes, customs, and practices around food that became the foundation of their community's strength. They taught their children to value what they had, to appreciate the simple pleasures of a shared meal, and to find joy in the act of nourishing each other. Even in the face of economic hardship, these traditions endured. The importance of gathering around the table, of eating together, of sharing whatever food there was, these values were passed down through the generations. And as the years went on, these meals, which had once been a symbol of survival, became a celebration of community, of family, and of the resilience that had gotten them through the hardest of times. Now, in modern times, we may have access to a wide variety of foods. We might not face the same struggles as the poor of 1800s New York, but the influence of their food traditions can still be felt today. The meals of the past, simple, modest, and humble, remain a part of our food culture. They remind us that food is not just about what's on our plate, but about the story behind it, the hands that prepared it, and the community that shared it. So as we sit down to our own meals, let's remember the lessons of the past. Let's honor the resilience of those who came before us, who found strength in food even when they had so little. Their legacy lives on in the way we approach food today, in the ways we gather, and in the ways we nourish each other, just as they once did. As we reflect on the journey through the food experiences of 1800s New York, it's important to recognize how food was not just a means of survival, but also a powerful force that shaped social identity and community bonds. The poor in New York didn't just eat to survive, they ate to define who they were, to express their culture, and to strengthen the ties that held their communities together. Imagine walking through a neighborhood in New York during the 1800s, filled with immigrants from all over the world. Each community had its own distinct food practices, passed down through generations, and those meals were an essential part of what made them who they were. For the Irish, it was the hearty stews and the comforting potatoes. For the Italian immigrants, it was pasta and bread, simple but made with care. And for the Jewish community, it was dishes like matzo ball soup and challah bread, foods tied deeply to both religious practices and family traditions. Even though these meals were born out of necessity, they became more than just food. They became a way to express identity. The act of preparing a meal was a way to reconnect with their heritage, to bring a piece of the old country into their new lives. It was a way to pass down values, memories, and the essence of their culture to the next generation. Now imagine these immigrants coming together at a community gathering. They might not have had much in terms of material wealth, but when they shared a meal, they shared something more valuable: their culture, their stories, their bonds. The food they ate told the story of where they came from, and it became a source of pride. For the poor, especially in immigrant communities, food also played a role in forming new bonds. They may not have had access to fancy restaurants or luxury meals, but they could still invite neighbors to share a bowl of soup or a piece of bread. These meals were often communal, a way of coming together, of building relationships that helped create a sense of belonging. Food became a vehicle for solidarity, a symbol that they were in this together. As we reflect on these moments, we realize that food was never just about filling the stomach. It was about identity, community, and continuity. For the poor, even when food was scarce, it was still a link to something greater, a way to stay connected to their culture, to their neighbors, and to their past. And those bonds they created around the table would last far beyond the simple meals they shared. As we approach the end of our exploration into the food experiences of the poor in 1800s New York, it's impossible not to reflect on how far we've come in terms of food systems. The struggles of the past, the resourcefulness, the scarcity, and the reliance on simple, basic meals have shaped the way we think about food today. While the poor in New York once had to make do with what was available, in modern times the food systems have evolved, making food more accessible but also more complex. Imagine standing in a modern grocery store today, filled with a wide variety of products from every corner of the world. The shelves are lined with fresh produce, meats, canned goods, and packaged meals, all readily available for purchase. The simplicity of the past, when food was something to fight for and share, has transformed into a system where food is plentiful, yet sometimes disconnected from the struggles that once defined it. For the poor in 1800s New York, the idea of walking into a store and choosing from a variety of foods was unimaginable. Their meals were defined by what they could afford and what was available to them. Today, even those who face financial hardships may find that food is more accessible, but this access comes with new challenges: the convenience of processed foods, the complexity of modern diets, and the issue of food deserts where even today healthy food is out of reach for some. Yet, despite the convenience and abundance of food today, we can't forget the lessons of the past. The simple meals of the 1800s were not just about survival, they were about community, resilience, and the ability to make do with little. These values, these traditions, have carried through the generations, reminding us that food is not just about what's on the plate. It's about connection, about culture, and about care. As we move into an era of convenience and instant gratification, let's take a moment to reflect on the true meaning of food. For many, it's still a symbol of survival, a way of connecting with family and community, and a reflection of our shared humanity. The struggles of the poor in 1800s New York may seem distant, but their resilience, their creativity in the face of scarcity, is still present in how we approach food today. So as we sit down to our meals, let's remember that food is more than just nourishment. It's a story, a tradition, and a bond that connects us to those who came before us. In every meal, no matter how simple or complex, we carry forward the legacy of survival, of hope, and of community that the poor in 1800s New York passed on to us. As we come to the final stages of our journey through the food history of the poor, in 1800s New York, let's reflect on how food went beyond mere survival for these individuals and families. While their meals were often simple, even bare, the emotional connection to food played a crucial role in shaping their lives. Food was not just about eating, it was a source of comfort, of nostalgia, and of connection to something larger than themselves. Imagine the quiet comfort of sitting down to a bowl of soup after a long day of work. The soup might be nothing more than a thin broth with some potatoes or beans floating in it, but in that moment it's everything. It's warmth, it's familiarity. It's a small moment of relief in a day that has been filled with struggle. Food, in these moments, becomes more than just a physical need. It becomes a sanctuary, a retreat from the harshness of life. For the poor in 1800s New York, food was often a means of emotional connection. It connected them to their culture, their heritage, and their families. A shared meal, even if modest, created bonds that were unspoken but deeply felt. Family members gathered around a simple meal, offering not only sustenance, but also affection, comfort, and a sense of belonging. Even when the world outside their tenement homes seemed unforgiving, within the walls of their homes, food provided a sense of peace and unity. Let's take a moment to reflect. Have you ever had a meal that, despite being simple, brought you a sense of calm or comfort? Perhaps it was a dish that reminded you of home or a meal shared with loved ones. For the poor in 1800s New York, meals like these were more than a means of survival. They were an emotional anchor, a reminder that, despite the struggles, they had each other. Even though these meals were born out of necessity, they became more than just food. They became a way to express identity. The act of preparing a meal was a way to reconnect with their heritage, to bring a piece of the old country into their new lives. It was a way to pass down values, memories, and the essence of their culture to the next generation. Now imagine these immigrants coming together at a community gathering. They might not have had much in terms of material wealth, but when they shared a meal, they shared something more valuable: their culture, their stories, their bonds. The food they ate told the story of where they came from, and it became a source of pride. For the poor, especially in immigrant communities, food also played a role in forming new bonds. They may not have had access to fancy restaurants or luxury meals, but they could still invite neighbors to share a bowl of soup or a piece of bread. These meals were often communal, a way of coming together, of building relationships that helped create a sense of belonging. Food became a vehicle for solidarity, a symbol that they were in this together. As we reflect on these moments, we realize that food was never just about filling the stomach. It was about identity, community, and continuity. For the poor, even when food was scarce, it was still a link to something greater, a way to stay connected to their culture, to their neighbors, and to their past. And those bonds they created around the table would last far beyond the simple meals they shared. As we approach the end of our exploration into the food experiences of the poor in 1800s New York, it's impossible not to reflect on how far we've come in terms of food systems. The struggles of the past, the resourcefulness, the scarcity, and the reliance on simple basic meals have shaped the way we think about food today. While the poor in New York once had to make do with what was available, in modern times, the food systems have evolved, making food more accessible, but also more complex. Imagine standing in a modern grocery store today, filled with a wide variety of products from every corner of the world. The shelves are lined with fresh produce, meats, canned goods, and packaged meals, all readily available for purchase. The simplicity of the past, when food was something to fight for and share, has transformed into a system where food is plentiful, yet sometimes disconnected from the struggles that once defined it. For the poor in 1800s New York, the idea of walking into a store and choosing from a variety of foods was unimaginable. Their meals were defined by what they could afford and what was available to them. Today, even those who face financial hardships may find that food is more accessible, but this access comes with new challenges: the convenience of processed foods, the complexity of modern diets, and the issue of food deserts where even today healthy food is out of reach for some. Yet despite the convenience and abundance of food today, we can't forget the lessons of the past. The simple meals of the 1800s were not just about survival, they were about community, resilience, and the ability to make do with little. These values, these traditions, have carried through the generations, reminding us that food is not just about what's on the plate. It's about connection, about culture, and about care. As we move into an era of convenience and instant gratification, let's take a moment to reflect on the true meaning of food. For many, it's still a symbol of survival, a way of connecting with family and community, and a reflection of our shared humanity. The struggles of the poor in 1800s New York may seem distant, but their resilience, their creativity in the face of scarcity, is still present in how we approach food today. So as we sit down to our meals, let's remember that food is more than just nourishment. It's a story, a tradition, and a bond that connects us to those who came before us. In every meal, no matter how simple or complex, we carry forward the legacy of survival, of hope, and of community that the poor in 1800s New York passed on to us. As we come to the final stages of our journey through the food history of the poor, in 1800s New York, let's reflect on how food went beyond mere survival for these individuals and families. While their meals were often simple, even bare, the emotional connection to food played a crucial role in shaping their lives. Food was not just about eating, it was a source of comfort, of nostalgia, and of connection to something larger than themselves. Imagine the quiet comfort of sitting down to a bowl of soup after a long day of work. The soup might be nothing more than a thin broth with some potatoes or beans floating in it, but in that moment, it's everything. It's warmth, it's familiarity. It's a small moment of relief in a day that has been filled with struggle. Food, in these moments, becomes more than just a physical need, it becomes a sanctuary, a retreat from the harshness of life. For the poor in 1800s New York, food was often a means of emotional connection. It connected them to their culture, their heritage, and their families. A shared meal, even if modest, created bonds that were unspoken but deeply felt. Family members gathered around a simple meal, offering not only sustenance but also affection, comfort, and a sense of belonging. Even when the world outside their tenement homes seemed unforgiving, within the walls of their homes, food provided a sense of peace and unity. Let's take a moment to reflect. Have you ever had a meal that, despite being simple, brought you a sense of calm or comfort? Perhaps it was a dish that reminded you of home or a meal shared with loved ones. For the poor in 1800s New York, meals like these were more than a means of survival. They were an emotional anchor, a reminder that despite the struggles, they had each other. Food for these families was a thread that tied them together emotionally. It helped them weather the storms of life. And though it might not have been much, it was enough to keep them going. The poor in New York may not have had wealth or material comfort, but they had the emotional connection to food, and in that they found a kind of wealth that transcended their circumstances. As we sit down to our own meals today, let's remember that food is more than just nourishment. It's a way to connect, to comfort, and to create memories. It's an emotional experience that transcends the physical act of eating. For those who came before us, food was a symbol of resilience and of love and of hope. And as we share meals with those we love, we continue that tradition, finding comfort in each other in the simplest of foods, and in the quiet power of shared nourishment. As we near the end of our exploration of the poor's food experiences in 1800s New York, it's important to recognize the most profound element of food, the simple yet powerful act of sharing. For the poor, sharing a meal was not just about giving. It was about creating bonds, reinforcing communities, and finding hope in the smallest moments of generosity. Even when the resources were limited, they shared what little they had, and this act of giving became a cornerstone of survival, both physically and emotionally. Imagine a small family sitting around a table, each person contributing what they can. One might have a small loaf of bread, another a few slices of salted meat, perhaps a small pot of soup simmering on the stove. While the food might be sparse, it's the sharing that creates something greater than the sum of its parts. The act of passing a bowl or offering a piece of bread was not just about the food itself, it was about connection, community, and solidarity. Now, let's think about the neighbor who doesn't have enough to eat. Even though the family might be struggling themselves, they still find a way to share their meal. Maybe it's a little more bread or an extra potato. This small act of kindness, though modest, is a lifeline. It's a moment of humanity in a world that often seemed indifferent to their needs. The act of sharing is a reminder that even in the hardest times, there is room for compassion, for generosity, and for care. In these moments of sharing, food takes on a new meaning. It becomes a way to express love and solidarity. It's not just about the quantity of food, but the intention behind it. The poor may have had little, but they gave freely, not out of obligation, but because they understood the importance of supporting one another. For them, a shared meal was a symbol of survival, of community, and of hope. Let's take a moment to reflect on this. The act of sharing a meal is one of the most profound human experiences. It's an expression of care, of love, and of the bonds that hold us together. The poor in New York understood this deeply. Even when their own meals were sparse, they found ways to share. And in doing so, they created connections that went beyond food. They created a community, a sense of belonging, and a shared sense of hope. As we sit down to our own meals today, let's remember that sharing food is not just about nourishment, it's about connection. It's about the way food brings people together, strengthens bonds, and reminds us of the simple yet powerful things that unite us all. As we approach the end of this journey through the food experiences of the poor in 1800s New York, we come to an important realization. Food is not just a means of survival, but an eternal cycle that defines human existence. From the earliest days of civilization to the modern world, food has been at the center of every community, every family, and every person's life. For the poor of 1800s New York, food represented more than just nourishment. It was a cycle of hardship, resilience, and hope that continued from one generation to the next. Picture the life of a young child growing up in a cramped tenement, surrounded by the smell of stale bread and boiling potatoes. For this child, food represents a constant, something that must be earned, shared, and cherished. The family's struggle to feed themselves is passed down through stories, traditions, and the very act of preparing meals together. As the child grows, they inherit not just the skills to cook with simple ingredients, but also the values of resilience and community that come with it. Now imagine that same child grown up and perhaps living in the same tenement or in a new part of the city. Their life might be different in some ways. Perhaps they now have access to a slightly better diet, or they've moved up the economic ladder, but the cycle remains the same. Food is still a struggle, still something that must be earned, and still something to be shared with family and friends. The lessons of survival, of community, and of hope have become ingrained in the very fabric of who they are. As we reflect on the eternal cycle of food and survival, we also recognize how food can be both a reflection of where we've been and a projection of where we're going. For the poor of New York, food was never about luxury. It was about continuity, about making do with what you have, and about finding joy in the small moments of shared nourishment. That cycle of resilience continues to shape our food systems, our communities, and the way we relate to each other, even today. Now let's take a moment to pause and think about how this cycle of food, struggle, and hope has influenced our own lives. We may not face the same hardships as those who lived in 1800s New York, but the connection between food and survival, between food and family, still rings true. As we prepare meals, as we share food with loved ones, we continue the legacy of those who came before us, who found strength, community, and love in the simple act of sharing a meal. Food, in its most basic form, is a reminder of the cycles that connect us all, from survival to comfort, from struggle to hope. It is the one thing that binds us together, generation after generation. As we look back on the journey of food through the lives of the poor in 1800s New York, it becomes clear that food's role goes beyond just filling the stomach. It is a force that unites, transcending the hardships of any given moment and creating bonds that last across generations. It's the thread that ties families together, that holds communities in place, and that gives hope even in the darkest times. The meals shared by the poor, no matter how meager, were not just about surviving. They were about creating memories, building legacies, and forging connections that would echo through the years. Imagine now a grandmother sitting at the table with her grandchildren. As she prepares a meal, she teaches them the ways of the kitchen, passing down the same skills her own mother taught her all those years ago. The recipes may have changed slightly over time, perhaps a little less salt here or a little more seasoning there, but the essence remains the same. The food may be simple, but it carries with it a deep well of tradition, a reminder of all those who came before and the struggles they faced. For the grandmother, cooking this meal isn't just about feeding her family, it's about ensuring that the stories of the past, the sacrifices made, and the resilience shown continue to live on. The smells of the meal are filled with memories of hardship, of shared moments around a table, of food that kept them going, even when it was hard to make ends meet. As the grandchildren sit down to eat, they don't just taste the food, they taste history. They experience the same sense of unity and love that the generations before them shared in the same humble meals. Now, as the cycle continues, those same grandchildren grow up, perhaps living in a different time, a different place, with more access to food and comfort than their ancestors ever knew. But still they hold on to the lessons passed down through the meals they shared. As they cook for their own children, they remember the lessons of resilience and care, ensuring that food remains not just a necessity, but a means of connection, tradition, and love. Let's take a moment to reflect on this. Food, in its simplest form, is the link between generations. It carries with it the essence of those who came before, the hardships they endured, and the love they shared. Whether it's a grandmother's recipe passed down through the years, or a simple meal prepared with care, food unites us across time, binding us to our past while providing nourishment and comfort for the future. As we gather around our own tables, let's remember that every meal, no matter how small, is an opportunity to honor those who have shared their meals, their stories, and their love with us. Through food, we continue the cycle of resilience, community, and hope, just as the poor of 1800s New York did, despite all the challenges they faced. As we draw closer to the end of our exploration, it's important to understand the profound impact food had on transforming the lives of the poor in 1800s New York, not just in terms of survival, but in shaping their identity and their future. While it might seem like food was simply a means to get through each day, it was, in fact, a quiet revolution that allowed people to reclaim their dignity, build their communities, and even change their circumstances. The food they ate, the meals they shared, and the resilience they demonstrated through it all shaped the very fabric of society. Imagine for a moment the quiet rebellion that took place every time a poor family gathered to share a meal. They didn't have the wealth to dine in grand restaurants or enjoy luxurious ingredients, but they had something far more powerful, the ability to make something meaningful from the little they had. By finding ways to cook simple meals, by sharing what little they had with neighbors, and by turning mealtime into an act of togetherness, the poor created a space for hope, for community, and for a sense of self-worth in a world that often denied them both. This quiet revolution didn't happen overnight. It wasn't marked by dramatic changes or sweeping victories. Instead, it was shaped by the small, everyday actions of people who refused to be defeated by their circumstances. The food they ate, though basic, became a means of asserting their humanity, a way of saying, "We may not have much, but we are still here. We are still surviving, and together we are strong." Let's reflect on the power of food in these quiet revolutions. Think about the act of cooking a meal, of sharing it with loved ones even when there is little to share. The act of feeding someone, of caring for them through food, is a powerful form of resistance against a world that would overlook you. For the poor of New York, food wasn't just a necessity, it was a statement that no matter how difficult life became, they would not go quietly into the night. They would continue to feed themselves, to feed their families, and to feed their communities with whatever they had. And in this way, food became a tool for survival, yes, but also a tool for self-empowerment. Every meal, no matter how simple, was a victory in its own right. It was a sign that they were still here, still living, still finding ways to make it work. And through these small victories, they built the foundation for a future where perhaps food wouldn't be such a struggle. These quiet moments of resilience laid the groundwork for the many changes that would come in the following decades. As we reach the final chapters of our journey through the food experiences of the poor in 1800s New York, we must acknowledge something extraordinary, the enduring power of shared meals in building community and solidarity. While these families may have had little, the act of sharing food created a foundation of unity that transcended the individual struggles they faced. It was in these small acts of sharing, offering a piece of bread, a cup of soup, or a boiled potato, that the poor of New York found not only nourishment but also a deep, unspoken bond with one another. Imagine a scene late in the evening, the streetlights casting a warm glow on a small group gathered together in a modest apartment. The room is filled with the warmth of conversation, laughter, and the smell of a simple meal. Maybe the meal is a meager soup, maybe it's bread and butter, or a small portion of meat shared between several families. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. The true value of this moment lies in the shared experience. In this moment, food becomes a vehicle for connection, for solidarity. The poor, despite their circumstances, learned to rely on each other. They shared not just their food, but their struggles, their joys, and their hopes. They became more than neighbors. They became a community united not by wealth or material possessions, but by the simple act of sharing what little they had. The meal itself might have been sparse, but the sense of unity and comfort that came from sharing it was immeasurable. Let's reflect on the deep power of this act. To share a meal with someone is to offer something precious, your time, your resources, your care. It's a simple gesture, but one that has the power to transform lives. For the poor of New York, these shared meals weren't just about surviving. They were about building a sense of belonging, about reinforcing the idea that, even in a world that often overlooked them, they had each other. They were a community, and they would face their struggles together, side by side. As we think about these meals, we can't help but see the lasting impact they had on the generations that followed. The sense of solidarity, of caring for others, became ingrained in the community. It became a tradition passed down through the years, shaping not just how people ate, but how they viewed one another. A shared meal was not just about food, it was about recognizing each other's humanity, about offering compassion in a world that was often indifferent. As we sit down to our own meals today, let's take a moment to appreciate the power of sharing. Food, in its simplest form, can bring people together. It can create bonds, build communities, and offer a sense of comfort and solidarity. The poor of 1800s New York knew this deeply, and through their shared meals, they built the foundations of a community that would endure for generations. As we conclude this journey through the food experiences of the poor in 1800s New York, it's time to think about the future and how the lessons of the past continue to shape how we approach food, community, and survival today. The resilience, the sense of community, and the humble yet profound power of shared meals still resonate in the way we view food and its role in our lives. Imagine walking through a modern neighborhood today. The streets are lined with restaurants, grocery stores, and food trucks offering a vast array of options. There's no longer the same desperation for survival that defined the lives of the poor in New York's tenements, but the essence of food as a connection to each other remains. The future of food, especially in urban areas, is increasingly centered around community, sustainability, and the sharing of resources, much like it was in the past. As we think about this, let's reflect on how the struggles of the past have paved the way for a new understanding of food. While the poor in 1800s New York had to rely on their creativity and resourcefulness to make do with the limited food they had, modern-day food movements are built on similar principles: the value of community gardens, the sharing of food to fight hunger, the awareness of food waste, and the growing efforts to make nutritious food accessible to all. In many ways, these modern movements reflect the same spirit of resilience that characterized the meals of the past. But beyond sustainability and accessibility, the lesson we take from the past is about solidarity. Just as the poor in 1800s New York came together to share their meager meals, today's communities are embracing food as a tool to bring people together, to fight isolation, and to build stronger, more connected neighborhoods. It's in these shared meals, these moments of giving and receiving, that we find the true power of food, the ability to unite, to care for one another, and to remember that no matter our circumstances, we are stronger together. Let's pause and think about how we, too, can carry forward the lessons of resilience and community that food has taught us. Perhaps it's through organizing a community meal, participating in a food drive, or simply inviting a neighbor over for dinner. In each of these small actions, we are honoring the past, paying homage to the strength and unity of those who came before us, who shared what little they had to ensure that no one went hungry. As we reflect on the enduring legacy of food and survival, let's remember that food is never just about what's on the plate. It's about who we share it with, the love we put into it, and the way it brings us together. The poor of 1800s New York understood this better than anyone, and their quiet resilience continues to inspire us as we shape the future of food and community today. As we bring this journey to a close, it's important to reflect on the deeper truth that food is more than just sustenance. It is a reflection of the human experience itself. For the poor in 1800s New York, every meal told a story of hardship, resilience, and triumph. The simple, meager meals they shared weren't just about filling their stomachs. They were about survival, about defying the odds, and about maintaining hope in a world that was often indifferent to their struggles. Imagine, once more, a family sitting down to their meal in a small, crowded apartment. The bread is stale, the potatoes are simple, and the meat, if there's any, is a rare treat. But as they gather around the table, they are more than just hungry, they are surviving. In this moment, the food they eat becomes a symbol of something much bigger than hunger. It is a symbol of endurance, of the human ability to persist even in the face of overwhelming challenges. Food, for them, was never about luxury. It was about dignity. It was about the unspoken strength that comes from sharing a meal with those you love, even when everything else seems to be falling apart. Through food, the poor in 1800s New York held on to their humanity. In the simplest of meals, they found ways to care for one another, to provide, and to persevere. Now, as we think about the future, we realize that food still carries this same powerful symbolism. Today, we are fortunate to have access to a wide variety of food, and yet the lessons of the past remain. food is still a reflection of our struggles, our resilience, and our triumphs. It brings us together in moments of hardship, and it connects us to each other and to the stories of those who came before us. As we sit down to our meals today, let's remember that food is not just something we eat. It is a part of our shared human experience. It carries with it the stories of survival, of love, and of hope. It is a reminder that no matter how hard life may get, we always have the power to come together, to share what we have, and to endure. Food, in its simplest form, is a reflection of who we are. It is a testament to the strength of the human spirit, to our ability to adapt, to survive, and to find joy in even the smallest moments. And as we share meals with those we care about, we continue the legacy of resilience and hope that has been passed down through generations. As we come to the very end of this journey, we must recognize how food serves as a bridge to our past, something that holds not just nourishment but memories. For the poor in 1800s New York, food was woven into the very fabric of their lives. The simple meals they shared were not just about satisfying hunger. They were about remembering and honoring the past. Each meal, each ingredient, carried with it a story of survival, a connection to the past, and a sense of belonging to a community that faced and overcame incredible hardships. Imagine a family, many years after the struggles of the 1800s, sitting together for a meal. Perhaps it's a meal passed down through generations, a simple recipe that was once shared in the cramped apartments of tenement buildings. As the family gathers around the table, the food they're eating isn't just filling their stomachs, it's filling their hearts with memories. It's a connection to their ancestors, to those who once ate this meal and fought through similar challenges. Let's reflect on this. Food has an incredible power to carry memories. It connects us to the past in ways that are difficult to explain. A simple dish, whether it's a loaf of bread, a bowl of soup, or a plate of potatoes, has the power to transport us back in time. The tastes, the smells, the textures, they remind us of who we are, where we come from, and the stories of the people who paved the way before us. The poor of 1800s New York knew this better than anyone. Even in their hardest times, food was something that bound them to their culture, to their families, and to each other. The memories of the meals they shared were not just of what they ate, but of how they came together in the face of adversity. They were memories of hope, of resilience, and of the strength found in unity. As we sit down for our own meals today, let's remember that food is not just about filling our stomachs. It's about remembering, connecting, and honoring the past. Each meal we share is a link in the chain of our shared human experience. It's a way to keep alive the stories of those who came before us, to recognize their struggles, and to appreciate the sacrifices that were made so we could have what we do today. Food in the end is more than sustenance. It's a symbol of the continuity of human life, of the resilience and love that have carried us through the ages, and of the enduring connection we all share through the simple act of eating together. As we reach the final part of our journey, let's pause to reflect on the quiet strength that food holds in times of change. The poor of 1800s New York, despite facing overwhelming odds, found ways to survive, to thrive, and to connect with each other through food. Their struggle for sustenance was never just about survival, it was a reflection of their resilience, their ability to adapt, and their ability to shape the world around them, even with the simplest ingredients. Imagine, for a moment, a world rapidly changing. New York expanding, the rise of factories, new industries, and a shift in how people lived and worked. For the poor, these changes didn't always offer relief. In fact, they often made life harder. But in the face of this change, food became a constant, something they could hold on to. It was not just what they ate, it was what they shared. Food was the one thing that remained familiar in a world that was constantly evolving. Reflect on how food provided a thread of continuity during such a transformative time. the simple acts of preparing meals, sharing bread with a neighbor, or gathering together for a small feast of beans and potatoes were small moments that transcended the chaos of a growing city. These meals were not just about what was on the plate, they were about resilience, community, and hope. In the midst of industrialization, immigration, and rapid urbanization, the poor in New York were creating their own traditions around food. They adapted their diets to what was available, but they never lost sight of the significance of coming together, of sharing. These acts of shared food became an anchor in times of great uncertainty, a reminder that even when everything else seemed to be changing, the bonds formed through meals could not be broken. As we think about this, we realize that food continues to be a powerful force in times of change. In our own world, as we face new challenges, new technologies, and new ways of living, food remains a constant. It continues to bring us together, to nourish us, and to remind us of the strength we have in sharing with others. So, as we end this journey, let's reflect on the power of food in shaping our lives. It's more than just nourishment, it's a way to honor our past, to build our communities, and to face the future with the same quiet strength that the poor of 1800s New York carried with them. As we bring this exploration of food and its significance to a close, let's take a moment to reflect on the deeper truth that food, even in its simplest form, has always been a source of hope for the poor. In the midst of hardship, when every day felt like a struggle, the act of sitting down to a meal was a small but significant victory. For the poor in 1800s New York, food was not just a way to survive, it was a way to affirm that they had the strength to carry on, to face another day, to rebuild, and to look forward to a better future. Imagine one last quiet meal shared by a family after a long, hard day. The food is simple, perhaps a bit of bread, a boiled potato, and maybe some beans if they're fortunate. But as they sit together, there's a sense of peace, of unity. They are not rich, not by any measure, but in this moment, they have something precious, each other. They share more than just food. They share love, support, and the quiet understanding that together they will make it through. These humble meals were more than sustenance. They were a testament to the human spirit. Even when life felt uncertain, when there seemed to be little hope for change, these meals represented something profound, the belief that tomorrow would be another day to fight, to share, to connect, and to survive. It's in these simple acts of nourishment, of breaking bread with those we care about, that we find the resilience to keep moving forward. And so, as we reflect on the poor of 1800s New York and their relationship with food, let us also recognize the enduring legacy they've left us. Their strength, their creativity, and their hope in the face of adversity remind us that food is not just a physical necessity, it is an emotional anchor, a way to survive, to thrive, and to create meaningful connections. As we sit down to our meals today, let's remember that food is not just about filling our stomachs. It's about the shared experiences, the bonds, and the strength we derive from one another. In the simplest of meals, there is always the potential for hope, for resilience, and for a brighter tomorrow. As we come to the final part of our journey, let's reflect on the lasting impact food has had on social change and progress, particularly for the poor in 1800s New York. What began as a struggle for survival became, over time, a tool for resistance, for raising awareness, and ultimately for sparking change. The poor, who lived under such harsh conditions, used food not just to survive, but as a means to change their reality, to build solidarity, and to demand the dignity they deserved. Picture this. The poor, after years of having to make do with the simplest meals, began to use food as a powerful symbol of their struggle. Over time, as workers' rights movements and labor unions began to form, food became a central element of their fight for fair wages and better working conditions. The very meals they had once eaten out of necessity were now part of a larger movement for equality, for justice, and for basic human rights. Imagine a workers' rally where families gather not just to march for fair wages, but to share the food they've prepared, whether it's a humble pot of soup or a loaf of bread. In that shared meal, there is strength, unity, and a clear message: we deserve better. The act of breaking bread together became a form of resistance, a reminder that despite their poverty, they would not be silenced. Through food, they asserted their right to dignity, to fair treatment, and to a better life. As we reflect on this, we realize how food has always been part of the larger story of social change. From the poor in 1800s New York to the many movements of the 20th and 21st centuries, food has remained an essential element of the struggle for equality. The act of sharing a meal has always been an act of solidarity, of raising awareness, and of demanding a seat at the table for all people, regardless of their social status. Now, in our own time, we continue to see the power of food as a tool for change. Whether it's through food banks, community gardens, or efforts to end food insecurity, we are reminded that food still carries with it the legacy of the past. Just as the poor in 1800s New York used food to fight for their rights, so too can we use it to fight for a world where everyone has access to healthy, affordable meals. As we sit down to our own meals, let's remember that food is not just about sustenance, it is about community, change, and progress. It's about using the simple act of sharing a meal to build a better world, just as the poor of New York did, one meal at a time. As we draw our journey to a close, let us reflect on the most enduring lesson the poor of 1800s New York have left us: the heart of resilience. Their relationship with food, their ability to adapt, share, and continue despite overwhelming hardship, carries a message that resonates deeply even today. Through their struggles with food, what to eat, how to make do, how to care for one another, they demonstrated a quiet but powerful strength that shaped not only their own survival, but the foundation of future generations. Imagine a young child growing up in one of those crowded, dimly lit tenements, sitting down to a meager meal with their family. They may not have much, but they have love, they have their community, and most importantly, they have hope. They learn that even in times of scarcity, there is always room for connection. Even when their circumstances seem beyond their control, they can find strength in the act of sharing: a loaf of bread, a simple soup, a few potatoes. As this child grows up, they carry with them the values they learned at that humble table: resilience, community, the importance of food, not just as sustenance, but as a symbol of survival and hope. These lessons, passed down through generations, continue to shape the way we approach food today. In a world of abundance, we are still reminded that food is about more than just consumption. It is about caring for each other, about building bonds, and about finding strength in the simplest of acts. As we sit at our tables now, we have the opportunity to remember and honor the resilience of those who came before us. The meals they shared, the struggles they endured, and the strength they exhibited in the face of adversity are lessons we can carry forward. Food, in its simplest form, remains a constant reminder of what it means to be human, to persevere, to adapt, to find joy in the smallest moments, and to share what we have with others. Let's take this moment to reflect on how we can apply these lessons in our own lives. Perhaps it's by sharing a meal with someone in need, by making an effort to connect with our community, or by simply appreciating the food on our table a little more deeply. The poor of 1800s New York may have struggled, but in their struggle they showed us what it truly means to be resilient, to continue, to love, and to hope. Their legacy is not just in the food they ate, but in the strength they carried and the lessons they left for us all. As we come to the final reflection in this journey through the lives of the poor in 1800s New York, we find that despite the hardships, the true power of food lies not in its ability to nourish the body alone, but in its ability to bring people together, to express love, and to signify survival. The poor, who often had so little, understood this truth more deeply than anyone else. In their most challenging times, food was their constant, a way of finding hope, creating bonds, and expressing the quiet strength that would carry them through each day. Picture, if you will, one final scene. A family gathered around their table, sharing what little food they have. There's no grand feast, no elaborate spread, but what exists is a shared meal, simple, humble, but filled with meaning. Every bite is a testament to their survival, to their ability to endure even the harshest of circumstances. It's not just bread, potatoes, or beans. It's the embodiment of resilience, of connection, and of love. This meal, though modest, becomes a powerful symbol of community, of strength, and of the unspoken promise that they will face the challenges of tomorrow together. The poor of 1800s New York taught us something profound through their relationship with food, that even in scarcity there is room for generosity. Even in hardship there is room for joy. Even in struggle there is room for love. Their meals, no matter how small or simple, were acts of defiance, defying the harshness of the world, defying the circumstances they were born into, and finding dignity in the most basic of acts, feeding and caring for one another. As we sit down to our own meals today, it's important to carry this lesson with us. Food, though abundant in many parts of the world today, still holds deep meaning. It can still connect us to our past, to our communities, and to each other. The simple act of sharing a meal is a reminder that no matter how much we may have, it is our connections to others that give life its true meaning. Food, in its simplest form, is more than just sustenance. It is a legacy. It is a legacy of love, of survival, of resilience, and of shared humanity. The poor in 1800s New York may have struggled with food, but in their struggles they taught us the most important lesson of all, that even in the most difficult times, we have the power to nourish, to connect, and to love. As we bring this journey through the food history of 1800s New York to its final chapter, we are reminded that the unbreakable bond of shared meals extends far beyond the generations of the past. For the poor of New York, food was not just a physical necessity, it was a way to assert their humanity, to create bonds and to give meaning to even the hardest of days. And as we look to the future, we can see how these very same bonds continue to shape our world. Imagine for a moment that same family we've followed through these pages. The scene is simple. A mother preparing food in a modest kitchen, the smell of a simple stew or loaf of bread filling the air. It's the end of another long day, and as the family gathers around the table, they share not just food but their stories, their experiences, and their love for one another. The meal they share is far from extravagant, but in that moment, it's enough. Now fast forward to our world today, where food has become something we may take for granted. We have access to more variety and abundance than ever before, but the lessons of the past remain. The simple act of sharing a meal, of sitting together and connecting, continues to have the same profound impact. We may not face the same struggles as the poor of 1800s New York, but we can still learn from their resilience, their ability to create meaning in their meals, and the way they built communities around the act of sharing food. Let's pause here and reflect on this. Food, in its most basic form, is a symbol of togetherness, of community, and of hope. It is a reminder that despite the passage of time, the challenges we face are often shared by those who came before us. Just as the poor of New York fought to survive and shared their meals with those around them, we too can find strength in the act of sharing food, whether it's with family, friends, or neighbors. Food will always be more than just a physical necessity. It is a thread that connects us all across time, across generations. It is a way to honor the struggles of the past and continue the legacy of resilience, community, and love. And as we sit down to our own meals, let's remember that no matter how simple or humble, food is an act of connection, a celebration of life, and a testament to the unbreakable bond that we share. As we conclude this journey through the lives of the poor in 1800s New York, it's important to recognize how food was not just a means of survival, but also a silent yet powerful agent of social change. For the poor, the act of eating, of preparing and sharing food was an expression of resilience. But it was also a quiet act of resistance, a way to assert their dignity, their worth, and their place in a world that often overlooked them. Imagine a gathering in one of New York's bustling immigrant neighborhoods. The food may be simple, perhaps some bread, a little cheese, maybe some beans, but it carries a profound meaning. The meal is shared not only as a means to fill their stomachs, but as a way to come together, to show that despite the hardships, they are still here. They are not invisible. In these quiet acts of sharing food, they found solidarity, they found strength in community. Now let's reflect on how these acts of shared meals laid the groundwork for movements that would follow. The humble, shared, meals of the poor became a foundation for greater social movements, labor rights, immigrant rights, civil rights, where food was often used as a tool to unite, to advocate for change, and to demand justice. The simple act of gathering around a table, sharing what little was available, became a symbol of the fight for dignity, equality, and human rights. For the poor, food was never just about nourishment. It was about asserting their humanity, about carving out a space where they could be heard, be seen, and be valued. And as time went on, these small, quiet acts became the building blocks of larger social change. Whether through food banks, community kitchens, or the fight for workers' rights, food has always played a central role in movements that aim to create a more just and equitable society. As we sit down to our own meals today, we are reminded that food remains a powerful tool for change. Just as the poor of 1800s New York used food to assert their rights, so too can we use food as a means to promote justice, build community, and advocate for those who are still struggling. Food connects us to one another, to our past, and to the possibility of a better future. So, as we enjoy our meals, let's remember that the food on our plates is more than just sustenance. It's a continuation of the quiet revolutions of the past, a symbol of community, of resistance, and of hope. As we draw our exploration to a close, one key theme remains. Food is not just a commodity, it is a reflection of human resilience, hope, and the will to endure. For the poor in 1800s New York, food was a vital source of strength in a world that often overlooked them. Even in their most challenging moments, food represented more than just nourishment. It was a symbol of survival, of perseverance, and of an unwavering belief in the possibility of a better tomorrow. Imagine, for a moment, the faces of those who lived in New York's poorest neighborhoods. The daily struggles they faced were immense: crowded tenements, grueling labor, and scarce resources. But despite these challenges, they continued to share meals, to support one another, and to find moments of joy and connection around the simplest of foods: bread, potatoes, beans. These may have been their staple meals, but the act of gathering together around the table, of sharing what little they had, was an act of resilience. It was a quiet defiance against a world that made them fight for every meal. These humble meals, often made with the most basic ingredients, were filled with more than just calories. They were filled with stories, with memories, and with a deep sense of community. Food became a way of showing love, of sharing experiences, and of proving that even in the most difficult times, there was always something to hold on to, something worth fighting for. It was in these moments of shared meals that the poor of New York found the strength to keep going, to face each new day, and to continue their struggle for a better life. As we think about the role food plays in our lives today, let's remember that the lessons from the past are still relevant. Even when faced with hardship, food remains a powerful source of hope and connection. In the simplest of meals, we find not just nourishment, but the strength to keep moving forward. Whether it's through cooking for our families, sharing meals with neighbors, or supporting those in need, food remains a tool for resilience, for building community, and for ensuring that no one goes hungry, either physically or emotionally. So, as we sit down to our meals, let's remember the quiet strength and hope that the poor of 1800s New York demonstrated through their relationship with food. Their legacy is not just in the struggles they endured, but in the way they used food to connect, to survive, and to continue hoping for a better future. Through food, they taught us the most important lesson of all, that no matter how difficult life becomes, there is always room for resilience, for community, and for hope. As we reach the final reflection in this exploration, we realize that food has always been a bridge between the past and the present, between struggle and triumph, and between individuals and the communities they form. For the poor in 1800s New York, food was not just a means to sustain the body, it was a central part of their culture, their identity, and their ability to express who they were in a world that often tried to erase them. Imagine, for a moment, walking through an immigrant neighborhood where the smells of freshly cooked food fill the air, pasta being prepared by Italian immigrants, sausages sizzling on the grill by German immigrants, and the rich aroma of stews and baked goods from various corners of the world. Despite the struggles they faced, these communities found ways to hold on to their cultural identities through food. It wasn't just about survival, it was about honoring their heritage, remembering where they came from, and passing these traditions on to the next generation. Food became the thread that connected them to their homelands. It was the one thing they could carry with them when everything else was stripped away. The rituals around meals, how food was prepared, shared, and enjoyed, became a form of resistance. It was their way of saying, "We are here, we matter, we belong." Through food, they preserved their cultures and identities, even in the face of hardship. Let's reflect on how food continues to play a similar role today. In our own lives, food is still a powerful expression of who we are. The meals we prepare and share with our loved ones are not just about satisfying hunger. They are a way to connect to our heritage, to our family history, and to the cultures that have shaped us. Whether it's a traditional dish passed down through generations or a new recipe that combines flavors from different parts of the world, food continues to be a way we express identity and honor our roots. As we sit down for a meal, let's remember the poor of 1800s New York and how, despite their struggles, they used food as a way to affirm their culture and identity. They didn't just eat to survive, they ate to live, to connect, and to continue the legacy of those who came before them. In the same way, our relationship with food can be an expression of our own strength, resilience, and connection to the past. Food, at its core, is a celebration of life, of survival, of culture, and of the bonds that hold us together. And just as the poor in New York used food to assert their place in the world, we too can use food to honor who we are, where we come from, and the communities we belong to. As we conclude this journey through the food experiences of the poor, in 1800s New York, one final reflection stands clear. The act of sharing a meal is more than just nourishment. It is a powerful act of care, solidarity, and community. For the poor, food wasn't just a necessity, it was a language of love, a means to protect each other, and a way of coming together to survive in a harsh, often uncaring world. The meals they shared, though modest, were filled with meaning. Imagine, for a moment, a neighborhood that has weathered countless hardships. The residents, many of whom have come from different parts of the world, know that survival is not just an individual struggle. It is one that requires the support of everyone. The idea of community care is ingrained in how they approach food. When someone is struggling, a plate of food is shared. When a neighbor is in need, the whole community rallies together, offering whatever they can. These simple acts of kindness, whether it's a warm bowl of soup or a loaf of bread, are their way of ensuring no one faces hardship alone. In these moments, food becomes a form of emotional sustenance as much as it is physical. A shared meal is an acknowledgement that while resources are limited, compassion is infinite. It is a reminder that no matter how difficult the world may become, we are stronger when we care for each other. For the poor of 1800s New York, food wasn't just a means of survival, it was a foundation for building relationships, for reinforcing community bonds, and for maintaining hope. Today, this lesson remains timeless. In our own communities, food continues to be an act of connection. Whether it's through food banks, community dinners, or simply sharing a meal with a friend or neighbor, the power of food to unite us is still felt. When we share a meal, we are not just feeding each other, we are nurturing bonds, strengthening communities, and offering care in its most basic, yet most profound form. So, as we reflect on this story, let's carry forward the legacy of the poor in 1800s New York. Let us use food not just to nourish ourselves, but to care for each other, to build community, and to ensure that no one is left to face the struggles of life alone. The simple act of sharing a meal has the power to heal, to unite, and to remind us of our shared humanity. As we near the final step of our journey through the history of food for the poor in 1800s New York, let's focus on the future, on how the lessons learned from the past continue to shape the generations that follow. Despite the poverty, the challenges, and the scarcity of food, the poor of New York left behind a powerful legacy. The belief that food, no matter how simple or meager, could still serve as a source of strength, of unity, and of hope. Imagine the children of those early generations, now grown, looking back on the meals shared by their parents and grandparents. Those meals weren't just about surviving, they were about resilience, about sharing hope even in the darkest of times. The lessons passed down weren't just about how to cook or how to make do with limited ingredients. They were about the value of community, the importance of sharing, and the unspoken strength that came from even the humblest of meals. These lessons, taught in kitchens and around dinner tables, laid the foundation for a future where food could become a tool for change, for justice, and for dignity. Now think of the world today. Though food systems have changed and many of us have access to a wider variety of foods than ever before, the core values that the poor of New York held on to still resonate. The importance of sharing meals, of connecting with those around us, and of understanding that food is not just about filling our stomachs, but about nourishing our communities is as powerful as ever. The legacy of those who ate their meager meals with love, resilience, and unity is something we carry with us. Today, from community gardens to food banks, from sustainable agriculture to sharing meals with neighbors, the principles of survival and solidarity that were taught in those crowded tenements continue to guide us. The poor of 1800s New York may have had little in material wealth, but what they had was a spirit of hope and determination that still guides the way we think about food, community, and human connection. Today, as we sit down to our own meals, let's take a moment to appreciate the legacy of those who came before us. Their strength, their resourcefulness, and their love continue to inspire us. Food is still a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the most difficult times, we can always find ways to share, to care, and to persevere. As we reflect on the journey through the history of food for the poor in 1800s New York, we come to realize that food is more than just a source of sustenance. It is a building block for community, for culture, and for change. The poor of New York, despite the dire conditions they lived under, showed us how food could be a tool for strength, unity, and transformation. They demonstrated that even in the face of hardship, food could create bonds that stretched beyond the individual to the larger community. Imagine the future generations now inspired by those who lived before them. These future communities have learned the lessons of resilience, compassion, and solidarity that the poor of New York embodied. They see food as not just something to consume, but as something to share, something that brings people together, whether around a dinner table, in a community garden, or at a local food bank. They understand that food can be a powerful force for positive change, whether in their local communities or on a global scale. The struggles of the past have shaped our current understanding of food. Today, food movements are growing everywhere, from sustainable farming to combating food insecurity. The lessons learned from those who lived in poverty, who fought to survive with limited resources, have laid the groundwork for modern movements focused on food, justice, equality, and sustainability. The spirit of togetherness and mutual care that was nurtured through food in the hardest times has become the foundation for efforts to create a world where food is shared equitably and where every person has access to nutritious meals. As we move forward, we continue to carry the legacy of the poor of 1800s New York. Their resilience teaches us that even in the face of scarcity, we can find ways to build communities, to care for one another, and to create a world where food is a source of connection and empowerment. The lessons of the past guide us as we work towards a future where no one goes hungry, where communities are united by the simple act of sharing a meal. Let's reflect on this final thought. Food is not just about survival. It is about community, solidarity, and hope. As we share our meals today, we honor the legacy of those who came before us, and we continue their work to build stronger, more compassionate communities, one meal at a time. As we bring this journey to its final step, let's pause to reflect on the eternal circle that food represents in human life. For the poor in 1800s New York, food was not just a means to survive, it was a cycle of connection from one generation to the next. The resilience they showed in sharing meals, in adapting to what little they had, and in caring for their families and communities created a legacy that we continue to carry forward today. Imagine once again those who lived in the tenements with their small, humble meals. They didn't have much, but what they did have was shared, whether it was a piece of bread, a boiled potato, or a meager soup. In each shared meal, they passed down not just sustenance, but their stories, their values, and their strength. These meals were the heartbeats of communities, and through food, the stories of survival, struggle, and hope were woven together. Now think of the generations that followed. As time passed, the food systems changed, but the lessons from the past remained deeply ingrained in the way people approached food. The act of sharing meals, of cooking with love, and of building communities around food became a powerful force in the fight for equality, for access to healthy food, and for the right to dignity for all people. From small kitchens in crowded neighborhoods to larger movements for food justice, the legacy of those simple, humble meals still resonates today. As we look to the future, we see how food can still be a tool for connection, for survival, and for social change. Food is a thread that binds us all, connecting the past with the present and the present with the future. It's a symbol of our shared humanity, of our ability to adapt, to care for each other, and to create hope even in the most difficult circumstances. So as we sit down to our meals today, let's remember the poor of 1800s New York and the lessons they taught us. Their resilience, their love, and their unwavering belief in the power of shared food continue to shape how we view food and community today. We carry their legacy forward in the way we share, in the way we connect, and in the way we fight for a world where no one goes hungry. Food is not just sustenance, it is life. It is a cycle of resilience, love, and hope that connects generations and shapes the future, one meal at a time. As we reach the final part of this journey, let us reflect on the true power that food holds in shaping our lives, our communities, and our futures. Food has always been more than just a way to satisfy hunger. It is a fundamental part of what it means to be human. For the poor of 1800s New York, food was a symbol of survival, resilience, and hope. And through their struggles, they created a legacy that continues to influence how we think about food and community today. Imagine a world without food. It's hard to fathom, isn't it? Food is the cornerstone of our existence. It nurtures us, brings us together, and connects us to our past. Whether it's the meals shared around a family table, the community gatherings where food is shared with love, or the small acts of kindness that involve offering a meal to someone in need, food has the power to create bonds that transcend time and place. The poor of 1800s New York showed us that even in the toughest of circumstances, food is never just a necessity. It is an act of care, of sharing, and of solidarity. The lessons they taught us about community, resilience, and hope are just as relevant today as they were back then. The act of sharing food is still one of the most powerful ways to connect with others, to show compassion, and to build stronger, more inclusive communities. In a world where we often face challenges and uncertainty, food remains a constant. It is the thread that binds us to one another, to our cultures, and to our shared humanity. It reminds us that no matter our differences or struggles, we all share a fundamental need to nourish, to connect, and to care for one another. And in the simplest of meals, we find not just sustenance, but love, hope, and strength. So as we finish this journey, let us remember that food is not just about filling our stomachs. It is about building the world we want to live in. A world where no one goes hungry, where every meal is a reminder of our shared humanity, and where food continues to bring us together in ways that transcend time and circumstance. Food, in its most basic form, is the greatest gift we can share. It is a reflection of who we are, of where we've been, and of the brighter future we can create together. With this, our journey through the food history of the poor in 1800s New York comes to an end. But the lessons of resilience, community, and hope live on in every shared meal, every act of kindness, and every step we take toward building a more compassionate world. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Good night.